Father, Mother God, we give thanks for this opportunity to be open to the awareness of your presence here, now. As we open ourselves up to the flow of your love through us into this moment, we are lifted. We are transformed. We are healed. As we open ourselves up to your love, we feel that transformation. As we rest in the awareness of your love, our moment changes. Our view morphs. Our experience is enlivened. And so we rest in that awareness, feeling your love moving through us. As we allow your love to move through us unconditionally, touching each and every one in our presence, extending beyond our presence to those in our awareness. We allow them to receive your love through them as they may be aware. But for those in our experience who seem to have a need for your love that are not aware of your love, we hold them in consciousness and we see them transformed, lifted, healed by your love. And appreciating the power, the transformative power of your love, we give thanks. And so it is that together we say, Amen. Well, have you found your one love yet? You know, from a romantic perspective, we dream about finding that one love, right? That soulmate. That partner in life that we can move through our various experiences, both the joyous and the challenging experiences. But that's not the one love I'm talking about. On Friday, we live in a neighborhood close to the high school, Fairview High School up in Boulder. And our neighbor across the street, about 15 or 20 years ago, was tired of the high school students parking in front of his house, and so he went to the city. The city said, "Well, we have this neighborhood parking program, and if you like, you can fill out an application, and we can consider it. We're going to have to call all the neighbors together and see if they're willing to participate in this." And so we had the neighborhood meeting, and I did not realize what this was actually going to entail. So in support of my neighbor across the street, I said, yeah, we'll go along with that. Well, it turns out that every November I have to go down to the parking office and renew our parking permit because we have we don't have we don't have a garage at all. We have a driveway, but it won't hold all the cars, so we have to park on the street. So if we park on the street and it doesn't have a parking tag on it, we get a ticket. And so every November, I have to go down to the parking office and renew the parking permit. Well, it turns out that it's not just a matter of walking in and writing them a check for $17 to renew the parking permit for the year. Instead, we have to show proof that we live there. Now, the fact that I have gone down there for the last 15 years to renew my parking permit they still require that I have a public service statement or something mailed within the last 90 days. I'm not quite sure why this parking fraud is such a big problem in Boulder, but nonetheless, the bureaucracy. Well, I decided to take Mackenzie, my 3-year-old granddaughter. I decided to take her down there Friday with me, and walked in. Supplied all my information, with the exception of a public service bill mailed in the last 90 days. Well, I explained to them in no uncertain terms that I had been living in that house, had owned that house in 1973, that they knew that I was there last year, and in fact, they made a note in my record. They made a note in my record last year that they had made an exception for me last year and gave me a parking permit without the presence of a public service bill. So I tried to convince them that was as good last year, or as that was as good an excuse this year as it was last year. But they said, no, the city ordinance says that we have to have this proof. I challenged them on that I'd never seen an ordinance that would have that resolution of detail in an ordinance that would say, and they finally admitted, well, actually it was a rule that we came up with here within the department. I said, well, okay, given that, why don't you just approve my parking? Well, the energy continued to elevate during this conversation. And Mackenzie, my granddaughter, was wandering around, playing with a crystal, lighted quartz crystal over on the desk, and they were kind of concerned about her pulling that off on the floor. And so as all of this was going on, Mackenzie came over to me, and she hugged my leg. She looked up at me, and she says, "Grandpa, I love you." Well, okay. So my performance at the neighborhood parking office on Friday was not what I would consider to be ministerial. Well, that bothered me. Not because I wasn't fulfilling my role as a minister, but rather it bothered me because I did not understand why I was so angry. It wasn't that I was angry at the parking permit bureaucracy. I had an underlying anger that I just couldn't get my hands around. And in fact, for the rest of the night, up to the point where I went to sleep, I had this going on. And I realized after a night's sleep, and I mentioned this to Linda, my wife, and she said, "Yeah, all day yesterday you were really on edge. I think it's because you've been watching all of these political shows." And I said, "Yeah, that seems to ring true." But then I realized it wasn't just the political shows. It was an underlying angst that I have because of the deteriorating glaciers in South America, in Antarctica, and in Greenland. It was the political prevarication that's been going on. It was on Friday there was now starting to talk about Sandy Hook, and you may recall Sandy Hook. 20 children, 6 teachers and administrators were killed by an insane lad of 20 who also killed his mother before he went to kill these children. I just it's not just a matter of honoring them but it's to realize that we as a society took their lives, each and every one of us. We are responsible. They would be 13 and 14 now. And I realized that it was this social angst that I was experiencing that was really the underlying aspect of the anger that I was carrying on Friday. So, we've been using Richard Rohr's The Universal Christ as a foundation book in this series of talks. And Richard Rohr offered us this. He says, "For the last few years, I have had to stop watching the evening news because I could not bear to see any more women and children running for their lives in Syria or babies starving in Africa. It all made me deeply heartsick and even nauseous. I did not like being human. Then my country entered into an election cycle where words seemed to lose all meaning. It was about illusion and naked ambition on all sides. American politics felt vacuous, delusional, empty, and thus vain, a foundation on which it's impossible to build a civilization. And yet large numbers, including 82% of white evangelicals and 52% of white Catholics, seem to think blatant racism and rather universal mean-spiritedness were somehow like the Jesus they loved so much. My heart ached for something solid and real. How could this be happening?" It was that social angst that I was feeling that he so eloquently puts into a single paragraph. That was the foundation of my anger. Boy, I just feeling heartsick. That's a good way to put it. And not being as enlightened as Richard Rohr, who's a Franciscan friar. Not being as enlightened as him, it wasn't heartsick, it was anger that emerged for me. So what do we do about this? How do we handle this? It turns out that each and every one of us is responsible for handling this. We can't rely upon somebody out there or somebody back east, somebody, some leader in our community. We can't rely upon that. You can't even rely upon me. God knows I got angry on Friday for nonsense. So how do we handle this? When I speak of one love, I'm not talking about that special someone, that soulmate. What I'm talking about is the one love that emerges from the heart of God. Have you found that one love? From time to time, I'm able to access that. From time to time, I'm able to find that. From time to time, I'm able to practice what I know to be true. But from time to time, I lose track. I get off track. I don't remember. Rohr says that some mystics even go so far as to say that individual suffering doesn't exist at all, that there is only one suffering. It is all the same, and it is all the suffering of God. The image of Jesus on the cross somehow communicates that to the willing soul. Crucified God is a dramatic symbol of the one suffering that God fully enters into with us, much more than just for us, as we're mostly trained to think. He's coming from a Catholic priest perspective on this. And I have found in my browsing through Google, I use Google News. It comes up with a whole list of various news articles from various sources across the spectrum. And I found that because I've been doing research on panpsychism, I'm getting all of these really interesting articles popping up in the Google News feed about panpsychism. And as I related to you before, this concept of panpsychism is that there is one consciousness that permeates the universe. It pervades. It is pervasive. That this one consciousness is manifest in each of us as individualized consciousness, which we may or may not be in harmony with that one consciousness. I have, over the course of the last, 5 or 10 years, been talking about this one consciousness as God itself. And so if we transform his Catholic theology into this panpsychic, is Clarence around? Okay, I'll use the word paradigm. If we transform this Catholic theology to the panpsychism paradigm, we can see that what he's talking about is this one consciousness that pervades, and that in this one consciousness there is that suffering, there is that societal angst that permeates all of our consciousness to one extent or another, depending upon how tuned in we are to it. But because there is one suffering, there is also one love. And that one love is the solution. It is the healing balm for that one suffering. So when the mystics refer to that there is one suffering of God, it's that one suffering of that universal consciousness. It is that one suffering that to one extent or another we tune into. And whether or not we are aware of it, we can in fact be conscious, as I was not conscious on Friday. But on Saturday, as I was thinking about what Linda said and what I was realizing, and then as more and more conversation arose, more and more articles popped up about Sandy Hook, I realized that indeed that is why I was angry. I'm angry about the environmental deterioration. I'm angry about no one paying attention in our country. Correction. I'm talking about no political leaders paying enough attention to the fact that we are causing our own destruction. The fact that we live for 70, 80, 100, 120 years, that kind of takes us out of takes us away from realizing the priority that we must place on this, because it's not a matter of this happening tomorrow, although the acceleration of these changes in the environment are becoming more and more apparent. That sea level rise, that doesn't affect us here in Colorado, does it? No, it's not going to affect us. Except that we're going to have an influx of population because people are not going to be able to afford to build the seawalls that are necessary to retain the entire Pacific from flowing over the basin of Los Angeles. We're not going to be able to handle across the planet, we're not going to be able to handle the displacement of 20% of the population that live within 6 feet of the high tide mark of the oceans. I mean, we're talking about significant changes that are coming on. And people are not paying attention to this enough to be able to say, okay, we have to make some changes. We have to make some investment. We have to sacrifice the gross national product, for God's sakes. Oh, no, we're not going to have to sacrifice that. And then we look at the economy. We see 3.5% unemployment rate, but 44% of the working population of the U.S. makes under $18,000 per year. That's full employment? No, that's people working 2 jobs just to be able to pay the rent, put food on the table, clothe their kids, pay for school, whatever. Martin Luther's needed justification by faith. Justification by faith is the concept that if you believe, you will be saved. Okay? The faith that you are going to be saved by the blood of Christ. That's a justification by faith. And so, from a Catholic priest perspective, he speaks this way. Martin Luther's needed justification by faith sent us on a 500-year battle for the private soul of the individual, thus leaving us with almost no care for the earth, society, the outsider, or the full body of Christ. This is surely one reason why Christianity found itself incapable of critiquing social calamities like Nazism and slavery and Western consumerism. For 500 years, Christian teachers defined and redefined salvation almost entirely in individualistic terms, while well-disguised social evils, greed, pride, ambition, deceit, gluttony, moved to the highest levels of power and influence, even in our churches. The corruption of Christianity, the corruption of the teachings of Jesus, the corruption of the teachings of Paul have caused us to focus on the individual and the salvation of the individual without regard to what is happening around us. I don't remember the number of people that declare bankruptcy because of medical expenses. But we are the only advanced country in the world that does not provide universal health care. Why is that? Oh, we can't afford it. It's going to cause a major disruption in the insurance industry. It's going to cause doctors to lose some income because they're not going to be able to charge $10,000 for a 2-hour procedure in the operating room. There is a couple of passages from Paul in Colossians 3. And I want you to read these from a mystical perspective, not the literal biblical readings that we're normally accustomed to. But I want you to consider that Paul indeed was a mystic, putting his message into the context of the prevalent worldview at that point in time. So in Colossians 3, verses 2 to 4, he says, "Set your minds on things that are above, not on things that are on the earth. For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, is revealed, then you also will be revealed with him in glory." That last sentence, when Christ, who is your life, is revealed, that is when you adopt the perspective that you are the Christ in this moment, then you will also be revealed to yourself with all your glory. When you realize that you are the harbor of the Christ, you are the hands, the tongue, the feet of God in this moment, when you are part of this universal consciousness and you are the missionary here in this moment for that divine word, then you will be revealed to yourself in all your glory. You will realize that you are the Christ. And when Jesus said, "The things I have done, you can do also," you will realize what he's talking about. You'll realize that you are the messenger of that one love. You are God in this moment. And then in 1 Corinthians it says, "When all things are subjected to him, God, then the Son himself will also be subjected to the one who put all things in subjection under him," under God, "so that God may be all in all." God may be all in all. Let that phrase sink in. God may be all in you. God may be all in you. God may be all in you, and you, and you, and you, and you, each and every one of us. God will be all in each and every one of us. We will realize that we are the messenger of God. We are the pastors of God. We are the ministers of God in this moment. And there is no reliance upon the guy who stands up in front of the audience, or the woman who stands up in front of the audience on the Sunday morning and preaches the Word of God, because we will each know we just have to change our understanding of who we are. We are the Christ here now. We are the messengers. We are the ministers. We are those who are responsible for each and every one of us. We cannot let a panhandler on the street corner hold up a sign in the freezing cold and we go by and wave to him because, well, if I gave him money, he'd just spend it on drugs. We have to be concerned about the child who is put in a cage at the border. We have to be concerned about the woman who is beaten and raped. I read an article yesterday. I read an article about the nurses in the crisis centers are buying bras and panties to give to the women who come in who have been raped and assaulted, because their clothes are confiscated for evidence. And what are they given? They're given a hospital smock and footies, cloth footies, to go home in. Can you imagine that? I certainly can't imagine. I can't imagine the aspect of the prospect of being raped, but we have to care for each other. We have to look upon the pain in the world. We have to say, no, this is not right. This is not right. Unless we find the communal meaning and significance of the suffering of all life and ecosystems on our planet. Unless we find the communal meaning and significance of the suffering of all life and ecosystems on our planet, we will continue to retreat into our individual small worlds in our quest for personal safety and sanity. Privatized salvation never accumulates into corporate change because it attracts and legitimates individualists to begin with. Privatized salvation never accumulates into a change for the good of all, because in and of itself it emphasizes that we are separate and apart. When are we going to change our view? When are we going to say, no, this isn't right? No, this isn't right. No, I don't care how much it costs. This is not right. The universal Christ is trying to communicate at the deepest intuitive level that there is only one life, one death, and one suffering on this earth. We are all invited to ride the one wave, which is the only wave there is. Call it reality if you wish. But we are all in this together. Pierre Desjardins said that love is the binding glue of the universe. I regard love as the gravity force of consciousness. And while it may seem weak, like gravity in the world is At the fundamental level, gravity is the weakest of the four fundamental forces. Panpsychism holds that consciousness is one of those fundamental forces, a fifth fundamental force, if you will. But love is the force that draws us together. When are we going to heed the call of that one love? When are we going to pay attention to that force that is our touch with God? We'll have our meditation. As we come into our meditation, let us come in with I cast all my... As we allow ourselves to set aside the stuff that we have brought into this moment, to set aside our pain, our suffering, to set aside our worries, our fears, to allow ourselves to be present in this pristine moment, this holy moment. Taking the sandals off of my feet, I stand on this holy ground. And in this place, released of all the fears, released of all the anxieties, the anticipations, and the regrets, releasing all of the stuff here in this one moment. We open ourselves to the awareness of God's love, the gravity of one consciousness. Breathing in and breathing out. In this pristine, holy moment, we realize that this is the way it can be because we've just chosen it to be that way. No one has dictated. One person has suggested. But we can take this realization that we have made the choice for this one moment to be pristine, filled with God's love, unconditionally given to us, that we may unconditionally pass it on. As conduits of this unconditional love, we are transformed. Our experience becomes imbued with this glory of love. We realize that we are the messengers of God here in this moment, offering this unconditional love into this moment. We look upon those around us and we recognize that each and every one of them has their history, has their experiences, has their challenges and burdens in this moment. And we forgive them for anything that they might do in reaction to their personal tribulations. We allow ourselves, through this being the conduit of this unconditional love, we allow ourselves to let go of any judgment, let go of any expectations. We allow ourselves in this moment to be the Christ. In this moment, we consider the angst that others are experiencing, and we realize that that is their story. That is their experience. And I will not judge them for it. But in this moment, I give them unconditional love because I've been there. I've done that. I've lived that. And I've been blinded by it. I've forgotten in the moment what I could be, the Christ. So we release our angst, we release our tribulation, we release all of the errors that we have made in the past. We extend our apologies if it's appropriate. We extend our love always unconditionally. And we are empowered. We are empowered to be the Christ, because that is our true nature. In this moment and every moment hereafter, there is no excuse other than just the forgetting that we are the Christ. But there is no excuse to not be the Christ, regardless of the situation around us, regardless of the blame that could be cast upon those actors in our moment. We come back to the realization of who we really are. And who we really are is the Christ. We are the conduits of this unconditional love. It is not our love that we give unconditionally. It is God's love that we give unconditionally, because God's love came through us, unmarred, untainted, unburdened by any expectations. We are the Christ. Let us remember that. And in remembering, become a member of the family of God once again. And for this realization, we give thanks. And as we come back into this time and space, let us come back sharing the words of Alleluia. Alleluia. And we'll take an offering for unity now. As we take our offerings in our hands, let us bless them with this offering statement. Together, please. Divine love, through me, blesses and multiplies all that I have, all that I give, and all that I receive. I give in love because I trust in God. And once again, Patty Jackson, Irreverence.